The story of Chad and Nikki Ensel, a seemingly ordinary couple living in Bismarck, North Dakota, unfolds as a dark and twisted tale of betrayal, greed, and murder. Chad, 42, was a hard-working maintenance worker known for his friendly nature and reliability. His wife, Nikki, 38, was ambitious and restless, harboring dissatisfaction with their life together. On the surface, their marriage appeared stable, but beneath it simmered growing tensions that would eventually lead to a sinister plot ending in Chad's tragic death. Chad and Nikki's relationship started out as a happy one. They met a few years before their marriage, and Nikki was initially drawn to Chad's kindness and the stability he offered. He was reliable, steady, and content with living a modest life, which she had seen as appealing qualities. After dating for some time, they married in early 2019, planning to build a future together. However, the cracks in their relationship began to appear soon after the wedding. Chad was content with their simple life, while Nikki became increasingly dissatisfied. She dreamed of a more glamorous existence, one that Chad's modest income and lifestyle couldn't provide. The difference in their outlooks became a major source of tension, especially for Nikki, who began to view Chad's lack of ambition as a significant flaw. As their marriage progressed, the gulf between Chad and Nikki widened. Nikki's frustrations centered around money, and arguments about finances became frequent. While Chad believed in living within their means, Nikki resented the limitations their lifestyle imposed on her. She had envisioned a life filled with luxury and excitement, and Chad's contentment with simplicity only deepened her dissatisfaction. Nikki's resentment toward Chad grew stronger with time. She saw him as the primary obstacle to the life she desired, and no matter how hard Chad tried to make her happy, by buying her gifts, planning outings, or making efforts to rekindle their relationship, it wasn't enough. For Nikki, her marriage had become a prison, one that confined her to a life of monotony and financial mediocrity. The growing rift between them set the stage for a tragic turn of events. As her dissatisfaction with Chad intensified, Nikki sought excitement and escape online. It was during this period that she met Earl Howard, a 41-year-old man from Texas. Earl was everything Chad was not: charismatic, adventurous, and full of confidence. Their online interactions soon became a daily routine, and Nikki found herself captivated by Earl's boldness and charm. What began as a casual friendship quickly escalated into a full-blown affair. Earl offered Nikki a glimpse of the life she craved. He fueled her fantasies of living a more exciting, glamorous existence, and Nikki began to feel alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. Her resentment toward Chad deepened as her infatuation with Earl grew. Earl listened sympathetically as Nikki vented her frustrations about her marriage, and he encouraged her to envision a future without Chad. Soon, Earl made a significant move. He left Texas and relocated to North Dakota to be closer to Nikki. The two began meeting in secret, and their affair intensified. Nikki saw Earl as the key to escaping the life she despised, and as their relationship deepened, they began to discuss more drastic measures to solve Nikki's problem: getting rid of Chad altogether. As Nikki and Earl's affair grew more intense, their conversations took on a darker tone. They began discussing ways to remove Chad from the picture permanently. Divorce was one option, but Nikki knew that it would be complicated and financially draining. Earl, however, proposed a far more sinister solution: murder. The plan was simple and chilling. Nikki would take out a life insurance policy on Chad, and they would stage his death as an accident. Earl suggested they could make Chad's death look like the result of a house fire, which would destroy evidence and make investigators believe that it was a tragic accident. Nikki agreed, and the two set their plan in motion, driven by greed and the promise of a future together. In the months leading up to the murder, Nikki arranged for a $600,000 life insurance policy on Chad. ensuring that she would profit from his death. They planned for Earl to carry out the killing while Nikki was away, establishing an alibi for herself. The two believed that once Chad was dead and the insurance payout was secured, they could begin their new life together, free from the constraints that Chad's presence imposed. On the evening of January 2, 2020, the plot to kill Chad Ensel was put into action. Chad was at home, unaware of the danger that awaited him. That night, Nikki left the house, checking into a nearby hotel. She told Chad she needed space after an argument, but her real intention was to create a rock-solid alibi. Earl, meanwhile, prepared to execute their deadly plan. Later that night, Earl arrived at the Ensel residence, where Chad was likely asleep. Armed with a gun, Earl entered the house and made his way to the bedroom. Without hesitation, he shot Chad twice, once in the chest and once in the head. Chad's death was immediate. To complete the plan, Earl set fire to the bedroom, using accelerants to help the flames spread quickly, ensuring that the house would be consumed by fire and the evidence destroyed. Confident that the fire would cover up the murder, Earl fled the scene, leaving Chad's body to burn. Not long after midnight, firefighters were called to the scene when a neighbor noticed smoke coming from the Ensel residence. By the time they arrived, the fire had already engulfed much of the house. Once the flames were extinguished, the firefighters made a grim discovery. Chad's lifeless body was found in the charred remains of the bedroom. At first, it seemed like Chad had died in a tragic house fire, but investigators quickly realized that something was amiss. An autopsy revealed that Chad had been shot twice, and the presence of accelerants at the scene indicated that the fire had been deliberately set. What had initially appeared to be an accident was now a homicide investigation. The discovery of Chad's murder sent shockwaves through the local community, and investigators immediately turned their attention to his wife, Nikki. Her behavior in the aftermath of the fire struck detectives as unusual. She seemed emotionally distant, almost detached from the tragedy. She told police that she had been staying at a hotel after an argument with Chad, but her story seemed rehearsed, and investigators began to suspect that Nikki knew more than she was letting on. As detectives began to dig deeper into Chad's life, they uncovered the affair between Nikki and Earl. Phone records and text messages revealed the extent of their relationship, and it became clear that the two had been in constant communication leading up to Chad's death. Nikki had tried to portray herself as a grieving widow, but the evidence told a different story, one of betrayal, greed, and murder. With Nikki and Earl now under suspicion, investigators began to piece together the details of their conspiracy. They uncovered text messages and phone calls that revealed the depth of their involvement in the plot to kill Chad. The messages painted a damning picture of Nikki and Earl discussing the life insurance policy and planning the murder in cold, calculated detail. Surveillance footage from the hotel, where Nikki had stayed on the night of the crime, provided further evidence. The footage showed Nikki and Earl together, contradicting her earlier claims that she hadn't been in contact with him. As the investigation progressed, it became clear that both Nikki and Earl had played active roles in orchestrating Chad's murder. Authorities moved quickly to arrest both Nikki and Earl, charging them with conspiracy to commit murder, arson, and related offenses. Both were brought in for questioning, and under the weight of the evidence, their stories began to crumble. Earl's nervous demeanor and shifting explanations only served to implicate him further, and soon both he and Nikki found themselves facing serious charges. The trial of Nikki Ensel and Earl Howard garnered widespread media attention, with the public captivated by the details of their affair and the cold-blooded murder plot. Prosecutors laid out a compelling case, arguing that Nikki's dissatisfaction with her marriage and her desire for financial gain had led her to conspire with Earl to murder Chad. The life insurance policy, they argued, was the primary motive. and they detailed how the couple had planned to stage Chad's death as an accidental fire to collect the payout. The prosecution presented a wealth of evidence, including text messages, phone records, financial documents, and forensic findings from the crime scene. They painted a picture of a premeditated, calculated murder, driven by greed and a desire for a new life. Chad's family members took the stand, expressing their heartbreak and anger at Nikki's betrayal. They described Chad as a loving husband who had trusted Nikki, unaware that she had been plotting his death. In response, Nikki's defense team sought to portray her as a victim of manipulation. They argued that she had been emotionally vulnerable, and that Earl had taken advantage of her state of mind. According to the defense, Earl had coerced Nikki into going along with the plan, and she had been swept up in a situation she couldn't control. They painted Earl as the mastermind behind the murder, downplaying Nikki's role in the crime. Earl's defense, on the other hand, attempted to shift the blame onto Nikki. His attorneys argued that Nikki had been the driving force behind the plot, and that Earl had acted out of misguided love. They claimed that Earl had been manipulated by Nikki, who had convinced him to help carry out the murder. Despite these efforts, the jury was not swayed by the defense's arguments. The evidence against both Nikki and Earl was overwhelming, and it was clear that they had conspired together to kill Chad. After a lengthy trial, the jury returned with a verdict. Both Nikki Ensel and Earl Howard were found guilty on all counts, including conspiracy to commit murder and arson. During sentencing, the judge condemned their actions as a callous and premeditated crime driven by greed. Both Nikki and Earl were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, ensuring that they would never walk free again. The murder of Chad Ensel shocked the community and served as a chilling reminder of how greed, betrayal, and moral corruption can lead to devastating consequences. What had started as a marriage filled with hope and promise ended in a gruesome and calculated murder, with Nikki and Earl paying the ultimate price for their actions. Chad Ensel had never been a man driven by ambition, but those who knew him respected his work ethic and humble nature. As a maintenance worker in Bismarck, he was well liked by colleagues and neighbors alike. He was the kind of man who helped others without seeking anything in return, fixing broken fences, shoveling snow for elderly neighbors, or taking extra shifts when a coworker needed time off. Chad had a reputation for being dependable and kind, always showing up with a smile and a positive attitude. While Chad was content with his modest lifestyle, he wasn't blind to the fact that Nikki wanted more. He had overheard her complaints to friends and family about how they couldn't afford vacations or new cars, and it hurt him. He did what he could to make her happy, but deep down, Chad knew that Nikki's dissatisfaction was bigger than anything material. He never expected their marriage to take such a dark turn, but even in the face of her constant frustration, Chad remained loyal, hopeful that with time they could bridge the gap between them. While Chad's quiet, hard-working demeanor seemed perfect on the outside, Nikki had a different perspective. In the early days of their relationship, Chad's stability had been exactly what she was looking for. After experiencing her share of ups and downs in previous relationships, Chad had seemed like a safe choice, a man who wouldn't betray or abandon her. However, as the months passed, she grew restless. The life they shared was stable, yes, but it lacked the excitement and luxury Nikki yearned for. In truth, Nikki had always had big dreams. She envisioned herself living in a spacious home, traveling to exotic places, and enjoying the finer things in life. While Chad worked long hours, Nikki grew increasingly resentful of what she perceived as his lack of ambition. She felt trapped in a marriage that no longer fulfilled her emotionally or materially. Their arguments, mostly about money, began to escalate. In her mind, Chad's refusal to chase after a wealthier lifestyle wasn't just a sign of contentment, it was a sign of failure. It wasn't long before Nikki began searching for an escape. She spent hours online, scrolling through social media, dreaming of a life far removed from the one she had with Chad. It was during one of these late-night internet sessions that she stumbled across Earl Howard. What started as a simple online connection quickly developed into something far more serious. Earl Howard, a Texas native, was a man of confidence and charm. In their online chats, Nikki found an outlet for all the frustrations she had been bottling up for years. Earl listened patiently as she vented about Chad's perceived shortcomings and the life of limitations she felt trapped in. He told her all the things she wanted to hear, how she deserved better, how life could be more thrilling, and how she could break free from her current situation. As their conversations grew more intimate, Nikki felt herself becoming emotionally dependent on Earl. Their virtual relationship was intoxicating, offering her the kind of excitement and passion that her marriage to Chad no longer provided. Nikki soon fell head over heels for Earl, and when he suggested they meet in person, she didn't hesitate. Earl traveled to North Dakota, and the two began their secret affair. For Nikki, Earl represented freedom. A life without Chad, without the financial struggles, and with the thrill she craved. But Earl's influence wasn't limited to passion and excitement. He also began planting darker ideas in Nikki's mind. If she truly wanted to start a new life with him, why not get rid of Chad? Why not secure her financial future through his life insurance policy? Earl knew that Nikki's dissatisfaction with her marriage made her vulnerable, and he took full advantage of it. As the investigation into Chad's murder unfolded, the impact on his family and friends was devastating. Chad's parents and siblings were heartbroken, unable to comprehend how someone as gentle and kind as Chad could have met such a violent end. They had always known Chad and Nikki's relationship had its challenges, but they never suspected that Nikki would be capable of such betrayal. Chad's mother, in particular, was shattered by the loss. She had always been close to her son, and she struggled to accept that the woman he had loved had been plotting against him. In the weeks following his death, Chad's family came together to support each other, but the grief was overwhelming. At Chad's funeral, tears flowed freely as loved ones shared memories of his generosity and selflessness. There was an undeniable sense of injustice in the air, as people whispered about Nikki's involvement in the crime. The small town of Bismarck was rocked by the news. Chad's murder was the kind of crime that felt far removed from their community, something you read about in big cities or see on true crime shows, not something that happened to people you knew. Local news outlets covered the case extensively, and everyone seemed to have an opinion. Nikki quickly became a figure of scorn, with many labeling her as a black widow, someone who had coldly plotted to murder her husband for financial gain. Forensic evidence played a crucial role in unraveling the plot to kill Chad Ensel. Investigators meticulously combed through the remnants of the burned house, and it wasn't long before they found evidence that pointed to arson. The accelerants used to start the fire had been strategically placed in the bedroom, and investigators noted that the fire had started after Chad's death, which contradicted Nikki's claims of an accidental blaze. Ballistics evidence further implicated Earl Howard. The bullets recovered from Chad's body were traced back to a gun that was later connected to Earl. This, combined with surveillance footage of Earl and Nikki together at the hotel on the night of the murder, provided investigators with a clear timeline of events. The couple's digital footprint was another key element. Phone records, text messages, and social media interactions all revealed the extent of their relationship and their conspiracy to murder Chad. With the forensic and digital evidence in hand, detectives had a strong case against both Nikki and Earl. But the case wasn't just about facts and figures. It was also about the betrayal of a man who had never seen it coming. From the moment investigators first spoke to Nikki after Chad's death, her behavior raised red flags. While it's true that people respond to grief in different ways, detectives noted that Nikki's reaction seemed unusually detached. She appeared emotionless when discussing Chad's death, and her explanations about the night of the fire didn't quite add up. Initially, Nikki tried to position herself as a victim, someone who had been away from the house due to an argument with Chad. But as the investigation continued, Nikki's version of events began to unravel. Her alibi, carefully crafted to make it seem as though she was nowhere near the scene of the crime, fell apart once detectives discovered the surveillance footage of her meeting with Earl. The more Nikki tried to distance herself from the crime, the more investigators became convinced of her involvement. Her calm demeanor during questioning only served to heighten their suspicions, and it wasn't long before they uncovered the digital trail that linked her directly to the murder plot. In the months following the trial, the town of Bismarck tried to return to normal. But the story of Chad's murder lingered in the minds of those who had followed the case. It was a grim reminder of how easily lives can be shattered by greed and betrayal. Chad Ensel's name became synonymous with the quiet man who had been wronged in the most brutal way possible. And while Nikki and Earl would never again experience the freedom they had sought, Chad's family would carry the burden of his loss for the rest of their lives. Bottom of form.